everyone, Zalafis here. I wanted to make a short tutorial for you on how to clean up your traditional inks in Photoshop. So as you can see here, I have an ink of a rabbit that I drew at the Museum of Natural History here in Nantes. They had a hare on display as well, but I'm not as happy with how that sketch came out. So I went ahead and inked this rabbit that I have here. Now, what I did is I scanned my sketchbook. My personal scanner settings, as you can see, I scan the entire scanning bed. So regardless of what paper size I put in here, my scanner captures the maximum size possible to scan. That's my personal preference because I like to have greater control over how I ultimately crop the piece, or if I make other adjustments. Your scanner settings might be different. You might scan just to the exact paper size. You might have a setting so that the scanner kind of tries to predict what you want to scan and will make those adjustments for you. But again, personally, I like to grab the entire space so that I then can make whatever manual adjustments that I feel are best for what I'm working with. So the first thing I want to do then in this case, since I have both my sketchbook and the rest of the scanning bed, is I'm going to crop what I want to work with. Now, sometimes when you first click the crop button, it'll automatically have a resolution predefined for you. If that's the case, and you'll see here it's 5:7 ratio, so you can adjust those if you want. If you want to try to work with that right off the bat, you can, but this one, because it's so close to the edge and everything, I'm just going to manually crop it out. So I'm going to hit clear. And that removes the cropping ratios, then I can adjust exactly how I want it to. My sketchbook is on a bit of an angle, so if I want, I can try to, just to kind of show the extreme of what's going on here, you can try to rotate the sketchbook to fit, but personally, I think it looks okay at this angle right here. So I'll just leave that part alone. But I just wanted to demonstrate that for you in case you do need to make that sort of adjustment. So I'm cropping just around the rabbit, and I'm making sure that there's enough margin here around the outsides, and I'll explain why that is next. So don't worry if you're grabbing other sketches or other inks you have in your sketchbook. Just make sure that you have enough margin. I am making sure that I'm not grabbing any of the shadows or any of the edges of the sketchbook. So I'm making sure that those are on the inside because I just want to make sure that I'm only capturing the ink and the paper that it's on so that it's easier for me to edit later. So that's looking good for me. I'll right click, I'll go down to crop, and that's cropped. So now you can see I just have my ink here, however I still have, you can see some of the paper texture, I still have this sketch on the side here, and even under the ink I still have all my original blue pencil marks. Working with blue pencil makes it much easier to grab your ink out of it afterwards, and I'll show exactly why that is next. So the next thing that I want to do is I want to go up to image here, and currently this image is in RGB. So I'm going to go to mode, and you can see RGB is currently selected. I'm going to change it to CMYK, and you'll get a warning about that, but just hit OK. And what just happened is, so RGB, generally speaking, that's the color you use for digital format, meaning RGB is used if your image is almost exclusively only going to be shown on a screen. In this case, CMYK is typically used for things that you will ultimately print. It's the format that's better read by printers themselves. That said, don't worry too much about that. There are so many printers these days and printing companies that are able to work with RGB formats images. So whatever image files you have, you can generally print with them. I've changed this to CMYK because that affords us some new options in order to parse out just this cyan or this blue color here. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Command U. The other way to arrive at that is to go to Image, Adjust, Hue, Saturation. And because we've switched it to CMYK, you can see I have these options here on just to adjust certain color levels. So I'm going to choose these cyans, and under lightness, I'm going to bring this all the way up. And you can see it pretty much erased all of the blue ink marks that you have there. So I'm going to hit OK. I almost entirely just have my black inks and the white paper. So the next thing I'm going to do is hit Command L to adjust the levels. The other way to arrive at that is to go to Image, Adjust, Levels. And what's going on here is this toggle adjusts the white level, this one adjusts the midtones, and this one adjusts the black. And you can see that there's this sort of graph here kind of outlining how much of each level there is. You also have these teardroppers to use. I personally don't use these really, but just to show you kind of what goes on, if you grab the white teardropper, which is the one on the right, and you say that this paper right here, this is the whitest part, and if you were to click that, it'll automatically adjust the image. You can see it change slightly lighter, and it also changed the graph as well. I'm going to hit undo. And just to show the opposite, this is the black point. So let's say that I decide that this eye is the darkest point. If I click that, it'll kind of automatically make adjustments there as well. So that's something that you can work with if you feel more comfortable doing those, using those eyedroppers. But again, I personally like to just adjust things manually. So the first thing that I do when using levels to adjust my inks is I grab the black point and pull it as far as I can up to where this sort of this graph begins to show. And you can see it's already making it a lot darker, a lot thicker. And you can zoom in and check things while you're working on this still. And you can also kind of see that the blue pencil I used isn't a perfect cyan, so there's still some traces of it coming through. You can grab this mid-tone point, and if you were to drag it this way, it would make your midtones or the gray areas a lot darker, so you could see them coming out more. However, we'll pull it the opposite way, and not entirely because I don't want to wash out this black part here. So I'll just kind of pull it to the other side of this mountain in this graph a little. And then I'll grab the white part and I'll really pull it up a lot more. And then once again, I'll grab the black and adjust that a little bit more. And that's looking pretty good. I think the other fair point about this sketch is that the sketchbook that I have, it has a bit of a tooth to it, so if I turn off the preview you can see the original. But the sketchbook that I have has these kind of like lines in it. It's kind of a textured paper. And I enjoyed this sketchbook. It's small, it's great to have around, it's good for sketching, for inking, for everything else. However, as you can see, as I'm trying to translate this into a plain black and white ink, that texture in the paper kind of gets in the way, and that's why we had a little bit of problems adjusting it. And that's also why this is looking slightly blurry, slightly faded out, but it's a pretty good translation. If you want a really good paper to ink with in order to scan them later, I recommend Bristol Smooth Board or Bristol paper. That's what I've used for many of my inks before, and that will give you a very, very crisp black and white scan that you want for later. I think that's as good as this one is going to get, for better or for worse. Some other adjustments I might make to just kind of tighten this up a little bit is just a simple sharpening of it. So filter, sharpen, sharpen. Okay, so that is looking pretty good. But let's say that I want to make the background a little bit bigger, or I want to crop it differently. One thing that I can do is to just simply grab the crop tool and reset it to something different. So I kind of enjoy this 2:3 ratio, so we'll go ahead and crop it like this. Cool. Alright, so that's looking pretty good. So I'll hit crop. So now that you have it cropped in the ratio that you want it in, you still have a bit of these edges to contend with. Because this looks white to you, your instinct might be to simply set your brush to a white color and then fill it in this way. However, the problem with that is every screen is calibrated differently, and while this might look white to you and you're simply adding more white to it, on a different screen, the original paper might still register slightly gray. So when you're adding pure white on top of it, on other screens, you'll still see an outline of where you've added this brush color. So what you can do instead is to grab the clone stamp tool and set a pretty big brush, not too big. And what you'll do is you'll hold Alt and you'll grab a sample, so you hit Alt and click to grab a sample of the paper you have, and then paint it that way. So that way, even if a different screen is calibrated differently, you're still grabbing the same color you have here, whatever it ends up being on somebody else's screen, and you're using that to fill in the background. So you'll see that I have to keep resampling, because however you sample here, when you paint up there, it keeps moving in the same direction. So my sample part has kind of gone over the ink at this point, and that's why, or the clone stamp tool is cloning the ink above there. Using the clone stamp tool really helps if you don't have the best scanner, or if you're working with paper that's kind of bent a little so you can't get the most crisp scan that you would like. But it helps ensure that however your screen is calibrated, the exact same color of your paper will be used to fill in the edges. So that's pretty much it. I'm pretty happy with this ink that I have here. You could still make some final adjustments with levels or the like, or one thing you can do is to duplicate it and set the top layer to multiply if you want it to be a little bit darker. So here's without, and here is with the multiply layer on top. Keep an eye out for this ink on my art galleries later on. Thanks again.